Hi, my name's Josh and we're here with a nerd, a geek, and a guy. This is the first episode and we're here to distinguish what's the difference between a nerd, a geek, and a guy.
When we started pitching the show, when we started talking about it, you had a really good definition of all three. And as I've talked to other people about the show, that's always the question. What's the difference between a nerd, a geek, and a guy?
Well, it doesn't matter what I think because Kermit's going to tell me what he thinks.
Kermit, what's the difference?
What do you think?
So we've got definitions for nerds, geeks, and guys. They're all socially assigned definitions. Josh and I were talking earlier. Geek is actually a really, really old term that used to go back to sideshow performers. I think it was specifically the guys who could eat anything. Right? They'd eat nails, they'd eat bees, they'd eat pieces of glass.
Have you seen the handcuffed king?
No.
Come on. Where's the straitjacket?
Who wants it?
The boss.
Is anything wrong?
The geek's going nuts.
The geek?
The one McGraw hired today.
Hey! Grab me, boy! You better get inside and stay there. Watch him now, don't hurt him.
What does that have to do with geek?
That's the first place I know of the word coming from. And I think it extends to a certain degree. Geeks are basically anybody who seems to be unusually knowledgeable and involved in what we would consider to be non-mainstream interests.
Fringe activities.
Anybody who's really interested in underground rock might be a rock geek. People are interested, before collectible card games were mainstream, if you were a Pokemon geek, you would be one of a small subset of people who played Pokemon, knew everything about it and whatnot. And it's not just people who participated, it's people who live it and love it. It's the guys who read everything about it, and they know all the lore, and they know why, I don't know, the history of Snorlax, which is like one of 3 Pokemon names I know.
How does that differ from a nerd?
Geeks are generally overly focused and involved in something that we wouldn't consider mainstream.
The super fan,
right.
Pretty much.
Nerds are kind of the same thing, which is why making a distinction between nerds, geeks, and guys is a little fuzzy.
You can also be a nerd and a geek at the same time,
Of course I can.
Can you be a nerd and not a geek, or other way around?
Yeah.
Okay, a nerd is pretty much people who specialize in intellectual pursuits. It can be someone who's got a sci-fi fanaticism. It can be somebody who loves cars, technically. They could be a car nerd because they know all the ins and outs of...
Wouldn't they be a car geek, though?
No, because it's engineering. That's completely different.
You need to actually be educated to a significant degree to be a nerd. Astrophysicists. Most of the characters on Big Bang Theory, for example, are excellent examples of nerds.
Now, they're also geeks.
They're also geeks, yes.
And the reason they're geeks is each one of them has, I don't know the show that well, but I'm sure some of them have like a comic book thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So they could be a comic book geek, but they're a nerd in real life because of their astrophysicist.
Yeah.
Hey, Shelley. What you doing?
Size ratio was all wrong. Couldn't visualize it. Needed bigger carbon atoms.
Sure. How did you get into this place?
Back door has a 5-pin tumbler system, single circuit alarm, child's play. You can start sorting protons and neutrons while I build carbon atoms.
No, I don't think so. We need to go home now.
One of the complaints I had when we were talking about the title of the show is I don't think any of us are smart enough to really qualify as nerds.
Oh, man, but that just tears apart the whole show.
We don't professionally work to any level that real hardcore nerds do.
Now, that being said, we know enough about Star Trek and Star Wars that would give us a good understanding about space and, well, astrophysics.
If you love watching sci-fi and you know that the Enterprise got stuck in a temporal loop, and you know what a temporal loop is because the episode told you, you're a geek. If you know what a temporal loop is because you've studied Einstein's, I don't know if Einstein doesn't have any temporal loop theories that I know of, but I'm sure there are mathematical theories behind temporal loops. Yeah. If you understood the math behind an Einstein-Rosen bridge, for example, instead of just mentioning it in Thor, and I'm smart because I said Einstein-Rosen bridge. Now, if you actually knew why an Einstein-Rosen bridge did what it did, then you would be a nerd.
Do you?
No.
I thought you were the nerd and you were the geek.
See, that's the secret. Everyone can look at him and assume that he's the nerd, but
Are you the nerd?
I can be, depends on the
You guys
subject.
should switch chairs.
No, I like this chair. I'm not moving, damn it.
Well, anybody who watches a law show ends up knowing semi-apocryphal knowledge about law that, you know, people who don't wouldn't necessarily know. Exactly. But they're not qualified to be lawyers by any stretch of the imagination.
What is your education in literature, right?
Yeah.
Are you a lit nerd?
No, because I haven't studied it in years.
But that's the interesting part, because nerds and geeks are now being interchangeable, like the definition of them. And the truth of the matter is we've kind of developed a hybrid between a nerd and a geek. We have people that are fanatical and enjoy the geekdom of their particular hobby, but at the same time, they are educated about it enough to be considered somewhere in between. And we don't have a term for that
Like,
yet.
if you studied Star Trek lore, and there's lore to study for Star Trek. If you knew every episode, if you knew how the show designers originally created warp speed to account for, you know, as a random thing, and then later on they developed an actual scale for it to account for the real star systems that they had the Enterprise visiting, and if you studied what the theory was behind warp drive, you could arguably call yourself surprisingly educated as a geek, and you could call yourself a nerd. We're making up these definitions.
It's just to show the contrast between the two terms. Right. But even though there is a lot of common ground and similarity.
But not with a guy.
Well, no.
The guy is the interesting part, because it talks about the hybridness, because there's different versions of nerds and geeks within guys and girls for that matter. I mean, some people are definitely into their own subject matter, but the term nerd and geek have been they've been given different definitions than what they actually mean. They're just different levels of fandom for the most part, and one has an academic connotation.
But yeah, the whole concept of guy is lots of nerds are guys. I mean, from a purely biological sense. So what sets it aside as a social definition? Like, do all guys surf and play football and watch the Super Bowl? I watched the Super Bowl this year. I bet on the Super Bowl this year. I did.
Did you win?
Now,
Yeah, he did.
I didn't bet on the teams. I bet on Captain America versus Star-Lord. But still, I watched the Super Bowl. What? I had skin in the game.
That was a thing?
That was a thing. Well, the point is, it's like, I sat around, I watched the Super Bowl. My friends come over to my place and we have beers and, well, not beers. We don't really like beer, but we drink.
So what does that make us?
All three.
We're all the same.
Unless your definition of guy is narrow. If a guy to you is only somebody who watches football and hates Star Trek and only plays video games to shoot people and blow them up and doesn't get involved or get his heart broken by frickin' wingless elf chick.
That's a Baldur's Gate 2 reference.
Yeah. No idea.
I know, don't worry.
My wings have been clipped.
If your personal definition is narrow, then guy only means certain things.
The show is almost about educating me on what you guys are into.
Oh, so we're just here to help you out.
It's really a selfish endeavor. Okay. No, well, it's like I have opinions sometimes on stuff, and you guys have super strong opinions, and I can interject.
Fair enough.
That's what this show
And we can
is
prove
about.
you wrong.
All right.
Sounds good.
We didn't get to surf poetry.
There's a reason for that. So with that, we're going to segue into our next episode. I hope you guys will join us on the next episode. This is probably the first episode where Kermit and I will come to blows. We're going to be debating the J.J. Abrams Star Trek against the other Star Treks.
Don't you even call them the other Star Trek. We're going to J.J. Abrams Star Trek versus Star Trek.
We'll see you guys next time.